Thunder crackled across the darkened Montana sky as Abigail Shaw clutched her 6-month-old daughter Emma tighter to her chest, desperate to shield the child from the biting autumn chill that seeped through the weathered stable walls. Every heavy raindrop that hammered against the roof was a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen since James died, leaving her with nothing but debts, a baby, and a wedding ring she'd been too proud to sell until today. The year was 1874, and the small town of Riverstone was already settling in for what promised to be a harsh winter. The hay beneath her was scratchy but dry, and Abigail had carefully arranged her tattered shawl into a makeshift bed for Emma, who mercifully slept despite the storm's fury. Their last dollar had gone to feed her daughter that morning, and with nowhere else to turn, she had slipped into the livery stable as dusk fell, praying the owner wouldn't discover them until morning. "At least we're not in the rain, little one," she whispered, pressing her lips to Emma's forehead, trying to ignore the pangs of hunger twisting her stomach. Her once fine dress, now patched and faded, provided little warmth. 6 months of struggling after James's death from pneumonia had left her thin and weary, her golden hair limp around her hollow cheeks. The stable door suddenly swung open with a creak, letting in a gust of wind and rain. Abigail froze, instinctively curling her body around Emma. Heavy boots thumped across the wooden floor and she held her breath, praying they would pass by her hiding place in the corner stall. The footsteps stopped. A lantern's glow spilled over the stall door. "Well now," came a deep, surprised voice. "This ain't the sort of boarder I was expecting." Abigail looked up, her heart thundering. A tall man in a duster and wide-brimmed hat stood there, water streaming from his shoulders. His face was partly shadowed, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that seemed to assess her situation in an instant. "Please," she began, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Just one night, we'll be gone by morning." The stranger hung the lantern on a hook and stepped closer. Abigail tensed, ready to flee if necessary, despite having nowhere to go. But there was something in the man's expression, not anger or threat, but a sort of quiet understanding that made her pause. He crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "Madam, you and your little one don't need to be sleeping in my stable." His voice was gentle, with the hint of a southern drawl. "You'll rest in a bed tonight." In the lantern light, Abigail could now see his face clearly. He wasn't as old as she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. His dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and those eyes, they were a startling blue that reminded her of the summer sky. "I don't accept charity," she said, lifting her chin despite her circumstances. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Didn't say anything about charity. I've got rooms above the stable that need cleaning, and I reckon I could use a hand around here during the days. It's honest work for honest pay." He paused. "Name's Kieran Porter. I own this livery and the house next door." Abigail hesitated, bouncing Emma gently as the baby stirred. "I'm Abigail Shaw. This is my daughter, Emma." "Pleasure, Mrs. Shaw." He stood, extending a hand down to her. "Now, what do you say we get you both out of this cold?" Despite her reservations, Abigail couldn't deny the relief that flooded through her. She carefully gathered Emma and her meager bundle of belongings, then placed her free hand in his. His palm was calloused but warm, and he helped her to her feet with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. "Thank you, Mr. Porter," she said softly. "Most folks just call me Kier." He reached down and picked up her small carpet bag before she could protest. "Come on, house isn't far and I've got stew on the stove." As they hurried through the rain to the modest 2-story house beside the livery, Abigail couldn't help but wonder if this was divine providence or merely a brief respite before the next calamity. Either way, tonight her daughter would sleep in a proper bed, and for now that was enough. The house was modest but tidy, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room where flames danced cheerfully, immediately enveloping Abigail in blessed warmth. Simple wooden furniture, well-used but sturdy, was arranged practically around the space. A pot bubbled on the cast-iron stove in the kitchen area, filling the air with a rich, savory aroma that made her stomach clench painfully with hunger. "Let me show you where you can get dry," Kieran said, leading her up a narrow staircase. "There's 2 rooms up here, mine's at the back. You and the little one can take this front one." He opened a door to reveal a simple but clean bedroom with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. A pitcher and basin sat atop the dresser. "It's not fancy," he said, lighting a lamp on the bedside table, "but it's warm and dry." "It's perfect," Abigail replied honestly, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of her real bed after weeks of makeshift accommodations. "There's clean water in the pitcher for washing up. I'll bring you some towels and see if I can find something dry for you to change into." He hesitated at the door. "I imagine you're hungry. I'll have food ready when you come down." When he left, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, cradling Emma against her shoulder. The baby was awake now, her big eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Are we safe here?" Emma's only response was to gurgle and grasp at a strand of Abigail's hair. After washing her face and hands in the cool water, Abigail did her best to make herself presentable. Her dress was damp and travel-stained, her hair a tangled mess, but there was little she could do about either at the moment. A gentle knock at the door revealed Kieran with an armful of towels and clothing. "These might be a bit large," he said, passing her a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers with suspenders. "They belonged to my sister when she stayed here last year. There's a belt you can use to cinch the waist." Abigail accepted the clothes with murmured thanks, too tired and hungry to feel proper embarrassment. When he'd gone again, she changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs of the borrowed garments. They smelled of cedar and soap, and despite their size, the dry fabric against her skin was heavenly. She fashioned a small bed for Emma using pillows and blankets, ensuring the baby couldn't roll off onto the floor, then made her way downstairs. Kieran had his back to her, ladling stew into bowls at the stove. He'd removed his duster and hat, revealing broad shoulders under a simple blue shirt, his dark hair slightly mussed. "Smells wonderful," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes as he took in the sight of her in his sister's clothes, her damp hair loose around her shoulders. "Hope you're hungry," he said, gesturing to the table where he'd set out bread, butter, and 2 steaming bowls. "Nothing fancy, but it'll fill you up." Abigail took a seat, trying not to appear too eager despite her gnawing hunger. "Is Emma still asleep?" Kieran asked as he sat across from her. "Yes, I've made her comfortable upstairs." Abigail picked up her spoon, then hesitated. "Mr. Porter, Kier," he corrected gently. "Kier," she amended. "I want you to know that I intend to earn my keep. Whatever work you have, cleaning, cooking, mending, I can do it all. I won't be a burden. Never thought you would be." He broke off a piece of bread and passed it to her. "Eat now. We can talk business in the morning." The stew was simple beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions, but to Abigail, it was the most delicious meal she'd had in months. She forced herself to eat slowly, savoring each bite, though she wanted nothing more than to devour it all at once. "How'd you end up in my stable, if you don't mind my asking?" Kieran's question was gentle, without judgment. Abigail set down her spoon, weighing how much to share with this stranger who had shown her unexpected kindness. "My husband died 6 months ago, pneumonia. He was a clerk at the Mercantile in Oak Ridge, about 40 miles east of here." The words came easier than she expected. "We had some savings, but James had been sick a long time before he died. The doctor bills took everything." She took a sip of water, steadying herself. "I tried to keep our room above the Mercantile, doing sewing and laundry, but with Emma to care for." She shook her head. "Eventually, I couldn't make the rent. I've been traveling west looking for work. I thought perhaps there might be opportunities in Riverstone." "And you've been sleeping rough all this time?" His brow furrowed. "Not all the time. Sometimes there were kind people, church, charity." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm not looking for pity, Mr. Poor Kier. I'm looking for honest work and a fresh start." He nodded slowly. "Riverstone's growing. Might be opportunities here for you. As for me, I could use help with the books and keeping the place tidy. I'm often busy with the horses and livery business." He leaned back in his chair. "I've been meaning to hire someone, just haven't gotten around to it." Abigail wasn't sure if he was telling the truth or simply creating a position out of kindness, but either way, she was grateful. "I'm good with numbers, and I can cook better than this when I have proper ingredients," she added with a small smile that earned a chuckle from him. "That a fact?" "Well then, Mrs. Shaw, I believe we might have an arrangement that works for both of us." Abigail, she said. Please call me Abigail. Later, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed with Emma sleeping peacefully beside her, Abigail stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. For the first time in months, she wasn't worried about where they would sleep tomorrow or how they would eat. It was a small reprieve, perhaps temporary, but in that moment, it felt like salvation. She thought of Kieran Porter's kind eyes and the way he'd opened his home to them without question. Men like him were rare, especially in these hard times. She wouldn't waste this opportunity for Emma's sake and for her own. As dawn broke over Riverstone, Abigail was already awake, having slept more soundly than she had in months. Emma had woken twice during the night for feeding, but each time had settled quickly back to sleep, seemingly content in their new surroundings. Abigail carefully dressed in her own clothes, now dry but still shabby, and carried Emma downstairs. She was surprised to find the kitchen empty, but a fire already crackled in the stove and a pot of coffee sat warming. A note on the table, written in a surprisingly neat hand, caught her attention. Gone to tend the horses. Help yourself to breakfast. We'll talk when I return. KP. Grateful for the chance to make herself useful, Abigail settled Emma in a makeshift seat fashioned from blankets and began exploring the kitchen. She found eggs, flour, and a slab of bacon in the small pantry. By the time she heard the back door open half an hour later, she had breakfast nearly ready. Kieran paused in the doorway, his expression one of pleasant surprise as he took in the sight of pancakes stacked on a plate, bacon sizzling in a pan, and the table properly set. Well now, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door, I wasn't expecting this. I hope you don't mind, Abigail replied, suddenly uncertain. I thought it might be a small way to thank you for your kindness. Mind. I can't remember the last time I had a breakfast that didn't involve cold biscuits or porridge. He crossed to the wash basin to clean his hands, then crouched to greet Emma, who was contentedly gumming a wooden spoon. Morning, little miss, you sleep well. Emma responded with a happy gurgle and a toothless smile that made Kieran chuckle. The sound was warm and genuine, and something in Abigail's chest tightened at the sight of this large, capable man being so gentle with her daughter. Over breakfast, Kieran outlined what he had in mind for Abigail's work. The livery stable did good business, as Riverstone was situated on a main trail. In addition to boarding horses for travelers, Kieran bred and trained horses for sale, primarily to ranchers and the occasional cavalry unit. I'm decent with numbers, but I'd rather be working with the horses than keeping ledgers, he explained. If you could manage the books, deal with customers when I'm busy, and keep things tidy around here, it would be a big help. I can certainly do that, Abigail nodded, relieved that the work sounded manageable even with Emma to care for. Pay would be room and board plus $8 a week, he continued. Not a fortune, but it's more than fair, Abigail interrupted, genuinely surprised by his generosity. It was nearly double what she'd earned at her last temporary position. They agreed she would start that day. After breakfast, Kieran showed her around the property, the livery stable with its 12 stalls, the small corral behind it where he worked with the horses, and the tack room that also served as the business office. It was here that Abigail would spend much of her time, organizing the chaotic ledgers and receipts that Kieran had haphazardly maintained. I told you it was a mess, he said sheepishly as she surveyed the cluttered desk. Nothing that can't be sorted, she assured him, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. The morning passed quickly as Abigail set to work while keeping an eye on Emma, who seemed fascinated by the new sights and sounds. Kieran came and went, checking on them periodically, bringing Abigail tea at one point and showing a remarkable knack for entertaining Emma when she grew fussy. By midday, Abigail had made significant progress with the ledgers, discovering that, while disorganized, Kieran's business was actually quite profitable. She was impressed by his skill with horses, watching from the office window as he worked with a spirited bay gelding in the corral, his movements confident and patient. When they broke for the midday meal, a simple fare of bread, cheese, and apples, Kieran mentioned that he needed to make deliveries in town. Would you and Emma like to come along? He asked. Might be good for you to get to know the town a bit, and I could introduce you around. Abigail hesitated, suddenly conscious of her worn dress and shabby appearance. I'm not sure I'm presentable enough for social calls. Kieran's eyes softened with understanding. There's a general store. We could get you and the little one some necessities while we're there. I haven't any money yet, she reminded him. Consider it an advance on your wages, he said easily. You can pay me back from your first few weeks' pay if it makes you feel better. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Abigail agreed. After feeding and changing Emma, they set out in Kieran's wagon toward the center of Riverstone. It was a pleasant autumn day, the storm of the previous night having cleared the air, leaving it crisp and fresh. Emma sat contentedly on Abigail's lap, her eyes wide as she took in the new sights. Riverstone was larger than Abigail had initially realized, a proper town with several streets radiating from a central square. There was a church with a white steeple, a schoolhouse, a bank, and various shops and businesses lining the main street. People nodded greeting to Kieran as they passed, regarding Abigail with curious but not unfriendly glances. Their first stop was the general store, a large establishment filled with everything from food staples to clothing to farming implements. The proprietor, a stout man with mutton chop whiskers, greeted Kieran warmly. "Kieran Porter, about time you showed your face in town. Been wondering if you'd fallen off one of those wild horses of yours." "Been busy, Frank," Kieran replied with an easy smile. "This is Mrs. Abigail Shaw and her daughter Emma. Mrs. Shaw's helping me with the livery business now." Frank's bushy eyebrows rose slightly as he looked between them, but he greeted Abigail politely. "A pleasure, madam. Any friend of Kier's is welcome here." While Kieran discussed a feed order with Frank, Abigail browsed the shelves, carefully selecting only the most essential items: a sturdy work dress, some fabric for making Emma clothes, soap, and a hairbrush. She was examining a bolt of calico when a female voice spoke beside her. "That would make a lovely dress for your little one." Abigail turned to see a woman perhaps a few years older than herself, stylishly dressed in a blue walking suit, her brown hair neatly arranged under a small hat. "I'm Margaret Wilson, the doctor's wife," the woman continued with a friendly smile. "You must be new to town. I don't believe we've met." "Abigail Shaw," she replied, shifting Emma to her other arm to extend her hand. "Yes, we just arrived yesterday." Margaret's gaze drifted past her to where Kieran stood talking with Frank. "And I see you've met our Mr. Porter." Something in her tone made Abigail hasten to explain. "I'm working for Mr. Porter, helping with his business accounts." "Is that so?" Margaret's expression was unreadable for a moment before warming again. "Well, we're always pleased to welcome new faces to Riverstone. You must bring your daughter to our church social this Sunday. It's a wonderful way to meet everyone." Before Abigail could respond, Kieran appeared at her side. "I see you've met Mrs. Wilson," he said. "Margaret's husband patched me up last year when a particularly disagreeable stallion decided I'd look better on the ground than on his back." Margaret laughed. "Thomas said you were the most stubborn patient he'd ever treated. Insisted on leaving the same day with 3 broken ribs." "Horse wasn't going to train itself," Kieran shrugged, then nodded at Abigail's selections. Found what you need. With their purchases completed, they continued their errands around town. Kieran seemed to know everyone, introducing Abigail at each stop. By the time they headed back to the livery, her head was spinning with new names and faces. "Everyone seems very friendly," she commented as they drove. Kieran nodded. "Good people mostly. Small town, they look out for each other." He glanced at her. "They'll look out for you and Emma too once they get to know you." The thought of belonging somewhere again, of having a community, brought an unexpected lump to Abigail's throat. She'd been so focused on basic survival these past months that she'd forgotten what it was like to have neighbors, friends, a place to call home. As the wagon rumbled along the dirt road back to the livery, Emma fell asleep against her chest, and Abigail found herself studying Kieran's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the afternoon sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. He caught her looking and gave her a small smile that warmed his blue eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He shook his head slightly. "No need for thanks. You're earning your keep and then some. Those ledgers already look better than they have in years." But they both knew it was more than that, even if neither was ready to name it yet. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm as October gave way to November. Abigail quickly proved herself invaluable to Kieran's business, organizing his chaotic finances and improving his operations with her practical efficiency. She discovered that her presence allowed him to focus more on the horses, which was clearly his passion. In turn, he ensured that she and Emma wanted for nothing, often returning from town with small surprises: a colorful rattle for the baby, a warm shawl for Abigail as the weather turned colder. Emma thrived in their new home, growing plumper and more active each day. She began to pull herself up on furniture, babbling constant streams of nonsense that nonetheless seemed to make perfect sense to Kieran, who would hold entire conversations with her that never failed to make Abigail smile. The house transformed under Abigail's care, becoming truly home-like, perhaps for the first time since Kieran had built it 5 years earlier. Curtains appeared at the windows, wildflowers in jars brightened the table, and the enticing aromas of home cooking regularly filled the rooms. Kieran never commented directly on these changes, but Abigail often caught him looking around with an expression of quiet wonder, as though he couldn't quite believe his luck. Their evenings settled into a pleasant routine. After Emma was tucked into her crib, a beautiful piece Kieran had purchased from the town carpenter, they would sit by the fire, Abigail sewing or mending while Kieran read aloud from one of his books. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories of their lives before they met. Abigail spoke of her happy if modest childhood as the daughter of a schoolteacher in Illinois, her brief courtship with James, the dreams they'd had before illness took him. Kieran told her of growing up on a failing farm in Tennessee, leaving home at 16 to work cattle drives, saving every penny until he could buy land and start his horse business. "I came west with nothing but a decent saddle and a better horse," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. "First few years were lean, slept in that stable more nights than I can count." "You've built something remarkable," Abigail said sincerely. "You should be proud." He shrugged, a gesture she'd come to recognize as his way of deflecting praise. "Been lonely work, though. Nice having you and Emma here." He looked at her then, something in his eyes that made her heart beat a little faster. House feels like a home now. It was moments like these, increasingly frequent, that left Abigail unsure of where they stood. Their arrangement had begun as purely practical, but there was no denying the growing warmth between them. Still, she was careful not to misread his kindness. Her position remained vulnerable. She had Emma to think about, and her wounds from losing James were still healing. As promised, Abigail had attended the church social with Emma, where she'd been warmly welcomed by the town's women. Margaret Wilson had been particularly friendly, introducing her around and making sure she was included in conversations. "Kieran Porter's a good man," Margaret had said as they watched Emma charm a circle of admiring ladies. "One of the best in these parts, though he'd die of embarrassment to hear me say so. He's been very kind to us," Abigail agreed carefully. Margaret gave her a shrewd look. "He's been alone too long, turned down half the eligible women in the county, though not for lack of their trying," she smiled. "Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." The comment had stayed with Abigail for days afterward, warming her thoughts on cold nights when she lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside and wondering what the future might hold. One blustery November afternoon, Abigail was working in the office when she heard a commotion in the stable yard. Setting aside the ledger, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside, Emma balanced on her hip. Kieran had just ridden in with 3 other men, all leading horses that looked trail-worn and skittish. One of the men, a weathered cowboy with a graying beard, was clutching his arm, blood seeping through his sleeve. "Abigail," Kieran called when he spotted her, "could use some help. Joe's been hurt." She handed Emma to young Tommy Wilson, the doctor's son who sometimes helped at the livery after school. "Take her inside and keep her warm," she instructed, before hurrying to assist. The injured man, Joe, had been caught in a rockslide while they were bringing horses down from the high country. His arm was badly gashed, and he was pale from blood loss and pain. "Margaret's fetching the doctor," Kieran explained as they helped Joe into the house. "But he's out on a call to the Anderson place. Get him by the fire," Abigail directed, her mind already running through what needed to be done. "I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and your whiskey." While Kieran settled Joe in a chair, Abigail gathered supplies. She had tended many injuries during James's long illness and had learned a good deal from the doctor who had cared for him. "This will hurt," she warned Joe as she carefully cut away his sleeve to reveal the jagged wound. "But I need to clean it before it festers." The cowboy nodded grimly, accepting the whiskey bottle Kieran offered. "Wouldn't be the first time, madam." As she worked, carefully cleaning the wound and applying pressure to stop the bleeding, Abigail was aware of Kieran watching her with something like admiration. When she finally wrapped Joe's arm in clean bandages, the bleeding had stopped and some color had returned to the man's face. "You've got skilled hands, Mrs. Shaw," Joe said gratefully. "Reckon I'll keep this arm after all." "Dr. Wilson will still need to look at it," she insisted. "It may need stitching and there's risk of infection." When the other cowboys had departed and Joe was resting comfortably while they waited for the doctor, Kieran found Abigail in the kitchen, washing blood from her hands. "That was impressive," he said quietly. "Where'd you learn to tend wounds like that?" "Necessity," she replied, drying her hands on a towel. "James was ill for nearly a year before he died. I learned what I could from the doctor and the rest from books." Kieran leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "You're full of surprises, Abigail Shaw. Is that a good thing?" she asked, attempting a light tone despite the intensity of his gaze. "The best kind." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and pine scent of him. "I've been thinking." Whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by a knock at the door, Dr. Wilson arriving to tend to Joe. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a current of awareness that couldn't be ignored. Later that night, after Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Abigail sat by the fire, unable to settle her thoughts. The events of the day had left her feeling strangely exhilarated, as though she'd passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. Kieran entered silently, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He passed one to her before sitting in the chair opposite, the firelight casting his features in warm gold and shadow. "Joe will be fine," he said. "Doc says you did everything right, probably saved him from a nasty infection." "I'm glad," she replied, sipping her tea. "How are the horses you brought down?" Settling in. "Their good stock should fetch a fair price at the spring auction." He paused, his eyes on the fire. "I've been thinking about expanding, building a proper ranch instead of just the livery." "That sounds wonderful," Abigail said sincerely. "You certainly have the skill for it. It's not something I could do alone." His eyes met hers across the space between them. A ranch needs a family. The air seemed to still around them, heavy with meaning. Abigail's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for what might come next. "Abigail," Kieran began, his voice low and earnest, "I know you came here looking for work, not complications, and I know you're still healing from losing your husband. But these past weeks with you and Emma here," he set down his cup and leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I never knew what was missing from my life until you showed up in my stable that night." "Kier," she whispered, her voice catching. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he continued. "But I wanted you to know that, for me, you and Emma aren't just employees or boarders. He searched for the right words. "You're home to me now." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes, unexpected but not unwelcome. "I never thought I'd find this again," she admitted softly. "After James died, I was so focused on survival that I couldn't see beyond the next day, the next meal." She took a shaky breath. "You gave us shelter that night, but you've given us so much more since then: purpose, safety, hope." Kieran crossed the space between them, kneeling before her chair and taking her hands in his. "I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Shaw, with both of you, and I'm hoping you might consider making this arrangement of ours permanent." A tear slipped down her cheek as she gazed into his earnest blue eyes. "Are you proposing, Kieran Porter?" His smile was both tender and slightly nervous. "I reckon I am, though I'm making a hash of it. Had a whole speech planned." Abigail laughed softly, squeezing his hands. "I don't need speeches." "What do you need?" he asked, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "Just you," she whispered. "You and Emma and this life we're building. I never expected to find love again, but here you are." Kieran's eyes widened at her indirect acknowledgement of her feelings. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she confirmed, her heart full to bursting. But, he prompted when she hesitated. "I want Emma to know about her father," Abigail said. "James was a good man who would have loved her dearly. I don't want his memory to be lost." Kieran nodded solemnly. Of course, we'll make sure she knows about her father, and I'll do my best to be worthy of being her second one." Abigail touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You already are." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Kieran leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but when Abigail's arms slid around his neck, it deepened into something more urgent, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Abigail Shaw." "And I love you, Kieran Porter," she replied, the words feeling both new and familiar on her tongue. "I think I have almost from that first night when you found us in your stable and said those words that changed everything." "You'll rest in a bed tonight," he quoted with a small smile. "Little did I know I was inviting you into my life forever. Do you regret it?" she asked, a last flicker of insecurity passing through her. "Not for a single moment," he assured her, sealing the promise with another kiss. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Riverstone. Most reactions were positive. Kieran was well respected in the community, and Abigail had made a favorable impression during her short time in town. A few eyebrows were raised at the speed of their courtship, but as Margaret Wilson pointed out to the town gossips, "When you know," and those two knew from the moment they laid eyes on each other. They planned a small December wedding at the town church with Dr. and Mrs. Wilson standing as witnesses. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, Kieran worked tirelessly expanding the house, adding another bedroom and enlarging the kitchen while Abigail sewed a simple but elegant wedding dress from cream-colored fabric ordered specially from Denver. On a crisp, clear winter morning, with snow dusting the ground outside the church, Abigail walked down the aisle carrying a bouquet of evergreen and dried flowers. Emma, dressed in a new white dress, was held by Margaret in the front pew. But Abigail barely noticed the small gathering of townspeople who had come to witness the ceremony. Her eyes were fixed on Kieran, standing tall and handsome by the altar, looking at her as though she were the sunrise after the longest night. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice warm in the small church. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Abigail like a benediction. A year ago, she had been a grieving widow struggling to provide for her newborn daughter. 6 months ago, she had been homeless and desperate. And now she stood ready to begin a new chapter, her heart full of love for the man who had opened his door and his heart when she needed it most. When it came time for their vows, Kieran took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke words of promise and devotion. Abigail's voice trembled slightly as she responded, but her heart was sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Kieran's kiss was gentle but sure, a promise of all the days to come. When they turned to face the congregation, Emma let out a happy squeal and reached for them, bringing laughter from everyone present. "I think she approves," Kieran whispered, taking the baby from Margaret and holding her between them. "Our family," Abigail said softly, her hand resting on his arm, "complete at last." The reception was held at the town hall, a simple affair with food contributed by the women of the community and music provided by a local fiddler. As Kieran led Abigail in their first dance as husband and wife, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Happy," Kieran murmured against her ear as they swayed to the music. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Later, as they prepared to leave the celebration, Dr. Wilson raised a glass in toast. "To Kieran and Abigail Porter," he proclaimed, "may your home always be as warm as your hearts, and may your love grow stronger with each passing day." "Hear, hear," came the response from the assembled guests. As they drove home through the starlit night, Emma sleeping peacefully in Abigail's arms, Kieran reached over and took his wife's hand. "Welcome home, Mrs. Porter," he said as they approached the house, their house glowing with lamplight against the darkness. "Home," Abigail repeated, the word filled with all the meaning and promise she had once thought lost forever. "It has a wonderful sound." Spring came to Montana with a riot of wildflowers and the birth of new foals in Kieran's expanded stables. The ranch he had dreamed of was taking shape. With additional acreage purchased over the winter, and a small herd of cattle now grazing in the lower pastures. Abigail had proven to be not just a wife and mother but a true partner in their growing enterprise, managing the business aspects while Kieran focused on the animals and land. Emma, now 15 months old, was walking and beginning to form words. Pa was among her first, a development that had brought tears to Kieran's eyes the first time she'd toddled across the kitchen to greet him with the word. He had scooped her up and spun her around, his joy so palpable that Abigail had felt her heart might burst with love for them both. Life wasn't without challenges. The winter had been harsh, with blizzards that had threatened their livestock and tested their resolve. There had been adjustments in their marriage, moments of disagreement, of learning each other's ways and finding compromises. But through it all, the foundation of respect and love they had built remained sturdy. One warm May afternoon, Abigail sat on a blanket in the meadow behind their home, watching as Kieran taught Emma to pet a gentle mare's nose. The little girl's delighted laughter rang out across the field as the horse nuzzled her palm searching for treats. "She's going to be a horsewoman just like her pa," Abigail called, shading her eyes against the sun. Kieran grinned, lifting Emma onto his shoulders. "Got good instincts already. Knows which ones are friendly." He walked toward Abigail, Emma's small hands tangled in his hair, unlike her mother who's still nervous around Thunderbolt. "That horse has a wild look in his eye," Abigail defended herself, making room for them on the blanket. "I prefer creatures that don't outweigh me by half a ton." "He's just spirited," Kieran insisted, settling Emma between them, "like someone else I know." He gave Abigail a meaningful look that made her blush despite their 6 months of marriage. Emma babbled happily, picking dandelions and offering them solemnly to each parent in turn. Abigail accepted her handful of weeds as though they were the finest roses, tucking one behind her ear to Emma's delight. "I have news," she said after a moment, watching Kieran's face carefully. "Good news, I hope?" he asked, stretching out on his side, propped on one elbow. "I think so." She took a deep breath. "Emma's going to be a big sister come wintertime." Kieran went very still, his eyes widening as her meaning registered. "Abigail," he breathed, "are you certain?" She nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before I told you." In one fluid motion, Kieran moved across the blanket, gathering her into his arms and kissing her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "I've never been happier in my life," he whispered against her hair when they parted. "Not even when that stallion you wanted finally arrived from Kentucky." She teased, wiping away a stray tear. "Not even close," he assured her, his hand covering hers over her stomach. "This is what I've always wanted, Abigail, a family, our family." Emma, not to be left out, wedged herself between them, patting Abigail's stomach curiously. "Baby?" she asked, her blue eyes so like Kieran's wide with question. "Yes, sweetheart," Abigail answered, amazed at her daughter's intuition. "A baby brother or sister is growing in Mama's tummy." Emma considered this information solemnly before declaring, "Baby," with a decisive nod, as though she'd known all along and was merely confirming the fact for her parents' benefit. Kieran laughed, enfolding both his girls in his embrace. "Smart as her mama," he said proudly. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, they gathered their things and headed back to the house, Kieran carrying Emma on his shoulders, his free hand firmly clasping Abigail's. "You know," he said as they walked, "I've been thinking about that night. The storm, finding you in the stable." "What about it?" Abigail asked, squeezing his hand. "I think it might have been the luckiest night of my life," he said thoughtfully. "Though at the time I just thought I was doing what anyone would do." "Not anyone would have opened their home and heart the way you did," Abigail replied softly. "Most would have given us a meal and sent us on our way." Kieran shook his head. "Never could have done that. The moment I saw you there, holding Emma so fierce and protective-like. Something inside me just knew." "Knew what?" she prompted when he fell silent. His smile was tender in the fading light. "That you were meant to be here, that after all those years of building this place, I was finally going to have a reason to call it home." As they reached the house, their home, Kieran paused, looking at the life they had built together in less than a year. The expanded stables, the new barn, the vegetable garden Abigail had planted, the rocking chairs on the porch where they spent summer evenings watching the sunset. "I love you, Abigail Porter," he said simply. "You and Emma and this little one on the way, you're everything I never knew I was waiting for. And I love you," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as Emma giggled above them. "For taking in two strangers that stormy night, for your kindness and your strength, for being the man you are." As they crossed the threshold into their home, Abigail thought of the desperate woman she had been, sleeping in a stable with her infant daughter, with nothing but uncertainty ahead. How different her life was now, filled with love and purpose and the promise of a future brighter than she could have imagined. "You'll rest in a bed tonight," Kieran had said on that fateful evening, simple words that had changed everything. And now, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Abigail Porter knew with absolute certainty that she would rest in that bed beside the man she loved, with their daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, and their second child growing beneath her heart for all the nights to come.